Hey, welcome back to our study this week. We are looking at Genesis chapter 35. And this study today is called 3 Occasions of Fellowship, because we're going to see Jacob had 3 occasions of fellowship with his Lord. And we're looking at verses 1 through 7 and then 9 through 15. We'll save 8 for the next section. But so 1 through 7, 9 through 15 today. First, let's look at how God speaks to Jacob. Now, God says to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there." It's interesting that whenever the Bible talks about going to Jerusalem, that you go up, right? If you ever read anywhere and it talks about Jerusalem, going to Jerusalem, you're always going up. Well, no matter where you're at, if you're in the north, the south, you go up to Jerusalem. You speak in this way because you're going up to a sacred place, a special place. A space that's been set aside. And so you would go up to that. You're coming out of the normal, and then you're going up to the sacred. And this is how God speaks here as well. He speaks that way of Bethel. You must go up to Bethel. Often we think of going up as the direction of going north, but Jacob is not going north. He's in the north, so he has to move south. This is a moving toward the holy. God gives him some direction as to what to do when he gets there too. So he has to leave behind where he's just coming from. He's still just outside the city of Shechem, which has just been decimated. And, so God is calling him out of that place, out of that low place, out of the place where that evil has happened by his sons, and calling him out of there and saying, you need to leave there, and you need to go up to Bethel. And God says to build an altar there at Bethel. So Jacob, remember, he built a memorial altar or a memorial pillar there before, but he didn't build an altar there. He didn't have a public worship of God there. It was just him before anyway. But you remember, he set up a memorial pillar because God appeared to him there. So now it's time to go and to do that, to build an altar. And so God gives him also a third command. He says that the altar is to be dedicated to God who appeared to Jacob when he fled from Esau. That's what he says. You need to remember God that appeared to you. Well, now you need to go, and God's telling him, now you need to go build an altar to the one whom appeared to you. So God points Jacob back to the dream of the ladder and his appearance decades ago. God is reminding Jacob of the occasion, and no doubt the vow that Jacob made. Remember the vow you made too? Yeah. You're on your way to fulfilling it. You're heading on your way there. You're almost there. So the promise of God that he would be with Jacob on his journey from Bethel all those many years has finally been fulfilled. He is now coming back to the place where it all started. And now Jacob must complete his vow. He needs to make God his God and give the 10th of all that he had promised. And so Jacob goes to his household and he begins to prepare them for the day's journey to Bethel. Remember, it's not that far away, It's probably about a day's journey for them. But he's getting them ready. So he has to get all the stuff, pack up the tents and get everything else ready. But more importantly, he prepares them to go worship God. So you have all these other, menial tasks, the daily chore and just the packing of everything, getting all the tents together, getting all the animals together to get ready to go. But he also wants to prepare them because they're going to worship God. That's the main reason why they're going there, is for a worship service. So he commands his household to get rid of all their idolatry. They need to get rid of all their worship of false gods. And so they give Jacob all their foreign gods. So if they had any idols, right, the little household gods, the teraphim, they were giving them to Jacob. Say, here, take our gods. Now, if you think about it, what kind of God is a God that you can just turn in? Think about that. It's not much of a God if you can just say, oh, here's my God. Thank you very much. If your God has the ability to be turned in, that's no God. But they turn in their statues, and then they also turn in their earrings that showed their allegiance to these false gods. So Jacob takes these items, and then he takes them all, digs a hole in the ground next to a terebinth tree near Shechem, and he buries them in there. It's like, we're not taking them to go worship God here, folks. We need to take these and leave them here. So he takes them all, buries them, gets rid of them, and that's where they stayed. So now, where did all these things, all these idols and earrings come from? We know that Rachel had Laban's household gods, right? He had those teraphim, and I'm sure by now, if she hadn't already gotten rid of them, that's maybe a source of where these household gods are at. And from the previous chapter, we can assume that the women and children from Shechem that came, who are now part of Jacob's household, they had their gods too. So maybe as they were, being taken, and as the boys were collecting all the goods, right, they probably collected all the household gods as well, all the teraphim, and they said, and Jacob saying, you got to get rid of that stuff. And so that's what they bury. And so they go to Bethel and they publicly worship God there. They had to leave, if they were going to do that, they had to leave these idols behind. So Jacob tells them to purify themselves and to change their clothes. This ceremony of washing and putting on new clean clothes was to be a physical demonstration of the change of heart, right? Of leaving behind their old self and becoming new. And that was something that God commanded the priests to do, is to change their clothes, to wash and put on their new clothing, and to represent that, they're moving from the defiled, from the evil, from the sin, and they're moving into where they're dedicating themselves to God. They're saying, our hearts are changing. We're leaving behind, we're repenting. We're leaving behind this old stuff, and we're moving to the new life. And you see that Paul picks that same idea up in the New Testament as well, when he talks about, taking off the old clothes and putting on new, taking off the old and putting on Christ. It's that same idea that they had back then, is that you're taking off this old person, these old ways of living, and you're putting on a new life, new way of living. And so the outward supposed to reflect the inward. That's the same thing we have for baptism today. As you go under the water and you go through that ceremony, it's supposed to represent the change of heart that is within. That's what it should represent. Does it always? No. Were all these people true followers of God? Probably not. But that's the idea here. So after the purification of his house, Jacob says that they will be ready to go and make an altar and worship the God who answered him in the day of his distress, and had been with him wherever he went. Now Jacob uses the very words that he asked God all those many years before. He had asked God for help. God promised him. Jacob vowed to worship God and give a tenth. God was with him every step of the way. Jacob must now finish his vow. The fact that here he says, he's basically quoting himself, kind of gives us the implication, the idea that, hey, he's ready to go and finish this vow. God, he's gone through all this stuff, and God has proven himself over and over again, and now he has to finish what he started. So verse 5 says that as they journeyed, on their way there, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. And this is what Jacob, in another day of distress, was worried about, right? In 34:30, he is afraid that the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people who lived nearby, would seek to destroy them because of what his sons had done to the city of Shechem. But God is for Jacob and protects Jacob by putting the fear into the hearts of the people. Otherwise, Jacob's fears would have been a reality. He was afraid before. He was afraid that the people would come and destroy them, and because of what his sons had done. And apparently, he was right. They would have. But that's why it says that God specifically put the fear of himself, really, into their hearts. He put the fear of God into them so that they left Jacob and his family alone. That's why they were left alone. That's why they survived. Otherwise, these people wouldn't have put up with that. They would have not allowed Jacob to get away with that. So Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, he was right to be afraid. But he wasn't right to be afraid because God was with him, right? So both of those were true. He was right to be afraid, but not right to be afraid, because if God wasn't with him, yeah, he would have been destroyed. But God was with him. All right, so Jacob arrives at Bethel here. Finally, Jacob and his household make their way to Bethel, and Jacob builds an altar just as God commanded. He's obeying God. Jacob names the altar just like he named the altar that he built near Shechem. Named that one El Elohi Israel, the God of Israel. And now he comes here, he goes back, and he builds this altar. He names the altar El Bethel, which means God, the house of God. So the altar is dedicated to the God who revealed himself to Jacob when Jacob fled from his brother. So there he's even obeying in the way he names the place. So there, remember, he had raised his pillar there. He took the stone, and he took the stone that he slept on when he had that dream of heaven opening and seeing the ladder coming down and stuff like that. So he had that pillar there. So now he's back in the same place where he had made that vow all those years ago at Bethel. And now he returns with a large household. And he had safely reunited with his brother. He met his brother, who was in a murderous rage, wanted to kill him. But he met him and he was safe. He survived that. And now he's publicly worshiping God with his household at Bethel. The journey has finally come to an end. This chapter of his life is finally done. It started all those years ago when he first left Bethel, and now it's finally come to fruition. That vow, that promise that he made now is fulfilled. After Jacob builds the altar, God appears and confirms and establishes all that has been done. God confirms the name change of Jacob that he had received from the angel of the Lord. So Jacob would no longer use the name Jacob, but Israel. Not only does God confirm his name change, but also confirms the covenant promises. God says that he is El Shaddai, which is the same name that he told Abraham back when God changed Abram to Abraham in Genesis 17. God also goes further back in the promised timeline than Abraham, all the way back to creation, when God told Adam to be fruitful and multiply. And he told Noah the same thing. And then he tells Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that promise that was from the creation mandate, be fruitful and multiply, and then was repeated to Noah, and then was actually given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Be fruitful, multiply. Your family, grow. And that's what he says. Your family will be like, the stars in the sky. They'll be like the dust of the earth, the sand on the seashore. That's the same promise that goes all the way back to creation. Be fruitful and multiply with Noah and with Adam. So we see the promises continuing. It's not just, these are not really different promises. This is the promise of God unfolding to this people. This is the plan of God unfolding before our eyes. So God also confirms the gift of land here that he gave to Abraham and Isaac. Jacob would have the same land and his offspring after him. Now, after all these words, God goes up from Jacob. We don't know how God appeared to him, but in some way, Jacob saw God go up from him. Reminds me again of the story of Manoah and his wife, who saw the angel of the Lord go up in the fire of their sacrifice. It's pretty similar to the story. I was surprised. I never really made those connections before to see those similarities between these two encounters of God with Jacob and God with Samson's parents, but they're very similar the way these stories are told. But after the Lord leaves Jacob, Jacob creates another pillar of stone, or maybe perhaps he adds on to the old one. He anoints the pillar with a drink offering and oil, and names the place Bethel again. This is the house of God. God had kept his promise, and Jacob has fulfilled his vow. This is really the last recorded occasion of God appearing directly to Jacob. We don't have it again. So in the last years, we don't have God appearing in a way that he could see him while he's awake. Now, God, it says that he appears, God will come to him again, but it's in the visions of the night, it says. So he doesn't show up again like he has. So we're really moving into really a whole new time of life for Jacob. This period is done. This part of growing is done. Now he needs to, now that God is his God, now he just needs to walk blamelessly before him. And so that's really the end of this section here. And these are the occasions, really 3 occasions of fellowship that Jacob has had with God. God talks to him. He goes and publicly worships him, and then God appears to him. And so now God has left him. And now we're going to talk about next week, or not next week, but next time we'll talk about the 3 funerals. So come back tomorrow, and we'll look at the 3 funerals.